Hi guys, this is Imran, and today we're going to talk about how to create the infinite scroll for loading the post. As you can see, this is a WordPress website, and when the user scrolls down, then after the 10 posts, the next 10 posts will display. Okay, and this button, this image will be showing us loading till the time the next pages are loading. Okay. So let's see how that works. So we're going to achieve that with the help of AJAX. Okay, so we're not going to use the WordPress functions to load the post, but we're going to use AJAX to get the post from the REST API. Okay, so this is our index.php page, okay, of our theme. Okay, and as you can see, this is the div which contains the main area. Okay, and this is the div where the post's content and the title and images and everything will be loaded. Okay, and this is the button which I have hidden it now. If I just remove this, you can see where this button is. So as you can see, this is right here. Okay, this is the button. Okay, so let's and the next part, this is the image, which is this loading image. This is an SVG image. So basically I've included this image from my file, which is right here. WP content, theme, cost barrel, SVG. So this is basically the image. Okay, oval.svg. I've downloaded that from the internet, and I've included this image source into this div, and that's how I'm able to achieve this. Okay, cool. So index.php pretty much just has the header, the get template part, the template banner, which is basically your slider. Okay, then it has the content for the post. This is the empty div right now, and we're going to insert the post dynamically via AJAX request into this div. Okay, and this is the button which I just showed to you right now, and then this is the image for the loader. Okay, this is the button. Okay, so this is pretty much going on a sidebar, and sidebar is this, which we have not included yet via customizer, and then the footer. Okay, this is pretty much what's going on the index.php. Then I have the infinite scroll functions.php, which is basically included in the includes folder. So infinite scroll functions.php, this is in the includes folder of my theme, and I have included this file by going on to the functions.php. See this? Okay, so I've included this file. Okay, and then I have the JS file, which is infinite scroll.js, and that's in the JS folder. As you can see, infinite scroll.js. Okay, and to include this JS file, I have written a function into my infinite scroll functions.php, which is wp-enqueue script. Okay, and this includes this file, the infinite scroll.js. Don't worry about this one. This is just to include the underscore.js, which is a JavaScript library. We might not need that. You can delete it if you want, but yes, this is required, the second one, which is including the infinite scroll.js file. Okay, so this is the hook. This gives me the path till our theme directory, and then we are doing JS infinite scroll.js dependencies jQuery, so it's going to load jQuery before that. Okay, and then time, because we don't want the JavaScript file to be used as a cached file. So time will ensure that every time it will give me a new version of the JavaScript file. So the version will change, and the timestamp will be the version number every time you refresh the page. And true means that it will be included in the footer. Okay. Then we've got this function which is called WP Localized Script. What this does is this creates an object called URL nonce and this function uses the same hook. We have to ensure you use the same hook as we are using in the JavaScript for the JavaScript file, and this is going to make sure it will create a variable which will have property name as URL var, which will have the URL of the API request of the WordPress to get the post. So this API request is going to display all the post, retrieve all the post, not display, retrieve all the post. Okay, and then this second property and name is nonce, and property value is the nonce. So WP create nonce will create a random number for the nonce for security purposes, and it's going to send it to our JavaScript AJAX, and from AJAX it will come back to this PHP file, and we're going to check whether verify whether it's the same nonce number for security purposes. Okay, we're using this function, check AJAX referrer. Okay, so just a recap in short for this file, right, and this function right here. This is going to include the JavaScript file. Localized script is going to create a URL nonce variable containing the URL of the WordPress REST API to retrieve the post, and the nonce, okay, as its property name and property value, property name, property value. Okay, and it's going to make this object available just before the infinite scroll.js loads, and I can show that to you that it is actually doing that. So this is where our file is, being loaded for the infinite scroll.js, and just before this we have got our variable URL nonce var is equal to URL. Okay, and the nonce number is this. Okay, so you can clearly see that it's loading this variable right before this file and making this variable available to this JavaScript file. Okay, which is right here. Cool. What else is going on in this file is that we've included an add action, and we've given the name as WP AJAX, my AJAX hook, and the function name is do something. And the reason why we have written this add action twice is because this add action will work when the user is logged in, and this one will work when the user is logged out. Okay, so in both scenarios our post will be loaded irrespective of whether the user is logged in or logged out, because remember that whether you logged in into our admin or not, our site should still run and should still display the posts. If we don't add the action for when the user is logged out, then the post is going to show only when the user is logged in. Okay, so this function basically is right here. So this check AJAX referrer uses the same hook, which is this my special string, which is this one right here, action. Okay, so and the next parameter is security, which is the same name which is mentioned into our AJAX function right here. Okay. And this function is basically going to verify that the nonce number that we have sent using this function into the object, which is this nonce number, is this once this is sent to JavaScript and comes back from JavaScript to the PHP file, it is the same number for security purposes. Okay, so that now the hackers should get into this. And this WP JSON send JSON success is basically the function to send the response to our JavaScript file to AJAX, saying that your request has been successful. So whenever a AJAX request is made in this AJAX function and the data is sent to our functions.php, this function is going to send a response back to our JavaScript AJAX saying that the request is successful. Okay, cool. So that's pretty much what's going on in this PHP file. Now we'll go to our JavaScript file. Okay, so in this JavaScript file we have actually defined an object called AJAX process. It's got properties like content, which will hold the HTML to display the post, page property which will hold the page number. So if page number is defined as 1, it's going to load top 10 posts, latest 10 posts. If page is 2, then it loads the post from 11 on page 11 to 20, 11 to 20, and then 21 to 30, and so on page 3, 4, and so on. Okay, request completed true. So we have defined this variable, property as request completed true. We'll keep that true by default, and when we go into our AJAX function, in case if it fails or in case if it fails, then it goes as false. Now init function basically is going to call this function right here, which is AJAX request, and the second function is show more post on scroll. So I'm going to go by these functions one by one. So first, this function, it's got two variables, request and AJAX URL. Then we are saying that if request completed is false, so currently it is true by default, so it's going to run. But if it is false, then it's going to go out. Okay. So once this code goes over here, we change it to false. Okay. And then the code will come here. So this is AJAX URL. URL known for is an object, as we have just seen. Object, and its property is URL var, which has got this URL right here. So this URL basically plus the page number, and plus the page number will be right here, this page 1. Okay, so if we actually go on to our Postman, this is an app on Chrome, an extension basically to see the AJAX request. Okay, so this is a URL basically. This was our actual URL. Okay, this was our actual URL, this one right here, embedded true, and we have added and page is equal to, and page is equal to, and then this number, which is AJAX process dot page 1, is coming from here. Okay, so the first request we're going to make is going to be for the page 1, and latest 10 posts will be displayed. If we do a send over here, which is the get request, you can see the top 10 posts are being retrieved. Okay, now so we're going to go ahead and call this function, which is jQuery.ajax. Okay, and we are holding this into a variable because later on, if you want to do this function .done, .always, .fail, we don't have to write this all over again. So we're holding this in a variable, this function, and that's why instead of doing the whole thing .done, we're just doing request.done, request.always, request.fail, and so on. Cool. So this function basically sends the AJAX request. It accepts the properties like data type JSON, which means the data we received should be in JSON format, and this is actually a JSON format. Okay, and then it's going to need the URL, because when AJAX sends the request, it sends the request via HTTP request, and for that we require a URL. So this URL I've already explained is this basically. Okay, then it's going to need the data. Okay, so in data we have the action as my AJAX hook. Okay, why this action is because WordPress actually has a file which is called admin AJAX. Okay, one second. Okay, my AJAX hook. So this part is coming from add action. Okay, this part, my AJAX hook. Okay, now if you see, it's got a prefix WP AJAX underscore, and this is coming from our admin AJAX. So it's got a do action because this add action is attached to the do action. wp underscore ajax underscore, which is the prefix, and this prefix for our second action. Yeah, and the suffix is the same on both, so that's not a problem. So what's going on right here is that it's going to check if the user is logged in. If he is logged in, then it's going to execute this do action function. But this do action hook will not be executed until unless a request action, so super global, has some value in it. Because as you can see that this hook, it's got a prefix dot dollar underscore request action. So this will have a value only when the AJAX request is sent. Okay, so once the AJAX request is sent, that's when this do action will work, and that's when the add action will be called, and that's when the do something will be called, and the response will be sent back to our AJAX. So it's, they are interlinked to each other. Okay, so the very first thing what's going to happen is that the JavaScript file is going to run, AJAX request will be sent. Because the AJAX request will be sent, the hook is going to start work. The dollar underscore request action will have some value once the request is made, and which means do action will run, which means add action in turn will run, which will call the do something function, and the response will be sent to AJAX saying that it's successful or it has failed. Okay, so it is interlinked. Just to recap, AJAX request is made, request action will have a value, do action will work, add action will work, do something will be called, and the response is sent back to AJAX saying that whether it's successful or it is failed with the WP send JSON success. Okay, cool. Now the security, obviously this URL nonce var nonce is basically, this is an object, this is its property, which has been created by this function. This object is created by localized script, and as you can see, URL nonce var object has got the property nonce, which has got this value. Okay, so this value is going to be sent to our functions.php, which will be available right here. To this function is going to verify if it's the same nonce number that was sent. If it is the same, the AJAX request, the response will be sent as complete. Okay, so basically this will run further. Then when the AJAX request is made, we've got the JSON data, which is this data. Okay, and that data will be available in the variable object. So when we do request.done function, this object will contain all the posts of the 10 post JSON data, which is this data. Okay, and if you actually check by going to our console, you can see this is the data that we've got in the object. Okay, this is all the data that we have. Okay, cool. So in this function, once the AJAX request is completed, which is why it's called .done, we're going to increment our page number by 1. So this was our page number, that was 1. We'll increment it by 1, which means it'll become 2, because whenever the user scrolls down, then the AJAX request will be sent again, and the second time it comes, the page number needs to be 2, then 3, and then 4, and so on each AJAX request. That's why we're incrementing the page number, because if we don't increment the page number, then we're going to get the same data again and again. So if you see over here, we change the page number to 2, we have a different data. Earlier the first post ID was 138, and now it's 22. You can see this. Alright, cool. So we're going to increment the page number, okay, and then we'll call the create and append content, because we've got the object which got all the post information that we need. Now we just need to create an HTML content and then append that to our div which we had created, this one right here. We're going to append all those content over here. So this object will have data for the latest 10 posts. So it's going to call this function right here. Let's see what's going on. Okay, so you've done the console.log object, and that's where we get this data right here, 10 posts data. So because we have 10 posts, we're going to loop through it, and we're going to create the content, HTML content. So variable I is equal to 0, and it's going to go till object length, which means it will go loop over 10 times and increment the value of I by 1 each time. Then the content which we had defined earlier as an empty string, we're going to keep on appending to this content. We're going to keep on appending the HTML each time the loop is run. The first time it's run, it will have the h1, which will have object, and the value of I will be 0 this time. And then it's going to go to dot title, because this is an object. So it's going to find the title property, which is right here. Then it's going to access its rendered property, because this is also an object. So rendered, and that's it. Okay, so that's Santana. Okay, is that what we have? Yep, that's what we have right here. Okay, next thing is the image. This is a little bit confusing, but I'll try to explain it in the best possible way. So image source is basically calling a function. I didn't want to complicate things, that's why I created the function, and you should always do that as well. Makes it just easier to understand. So AJAX process is basically again our name of our object, and it's accessing its method called get featured image URL, which we have defined right here. It's our custom function. We are passing the object, and we are passing this value of I, which will keep on changing from 0, 1, 2, and so on up until 9 each time this loop is run. So basically this function will be called 10 times. Okay, so in this function we are creating a variable called featured media ID. Okay, so object 0 is object 0 dot featured media is right here. So in case if the featured media is not present into the object, then it will be displayed as 0. Okay, and that's why we are going to check a condition over here saying that if featured media ID is not equal to 0, which means if it does have the featured image, that's when you'll run the further code. So featured media is equal to object I, object 0 in this case, then access the embedded property, which is here, then WP featured media property. So remember that if you have a colon in the property name, then instead of doing dot, you use bracket to access it, that property. Okay, then the 0th item, so 0th item. Okay, so you've got that. So in this we don't have the featured media, so it's not going to run. Okay, so we're also going to check if the featured media has a property of source URL, which means that if this has a source URL property. So in this case it doesn't have. So let's find out a post which does have. Yeah, so not even this doesn't have. Let's try to look for another one. Not even this one. Okay. think this should have this post. Yep, got it. Yep, it's got source URL. Okay. So basically, it's trying to say that WP featured media, the WP featured media, the zeroth item, does it have the property called source URL? Does it have a property? If it does, then that means that featured media URL is equal to this whole thing dot source URL. So the path till here dot source URL, and this is going to be the URL for the image. Okay. So this function basically finds out if the post has the image URL, and if it does, then it's going to return that. Otherwise, it's going to return empty string, an empty string. Okay. So basically, this image source will get either an empty string in case if the post does not have the featured image, and if it does, then it will have the URL, which will be returned by this function. Okay. And the next one is the content. So content will be like object, which is this. Then the zeroth item in the first loop, and then the content, which is this property, and then the rendered, this right here. Okay, so this is basically the content. Okay, and it's going to attach this content to this div. Okay, and then we're going to access the this div right here, this one, just recent post ID, and it's going to append the entire content made by this loop to this div. Okay, so obviously the first time it runs, it will have this content, the second time this plus the second content plus the third one, and so on. So once this loop is completed, we'll have 10 post HTML content, which will be appended using the append method of jQuery to this div. Okay, and that's how you're able to see the 10 posts. Okay, cool. I hope you've understood it so far. Okay, all right, so that's what's going to happen now. So I've explained what this function does, and this function eventually calls the other one, which creates and append the content. Okay, and this function calls the get featured image URL. So I've explained these three functions to you. Now the next function is show more post on scroll, because these functions that I've already explained are going to display 10 posts, but after the 10 post is displayed, when the user reaches this button right here, then it should show another 10 posts, and for that we have created this function show more post on scroll. So what this does is we have put an event listener on our window object on scroll, and when the user scrolls, then this function will be called. In this function we have defined variables like the button that we had here, trigger position, element offset from top. So these are the variables defined. Then we will find out what is the offset position from the top. So this is basically the window. This is window dot outer height. So we're going to calculate the height of the window. We're going to minus that from our footer height. Okay, so the entire window's height minus footer height is going to give us this value from here up until top, and so this is what it says, element offset from top. So the entire window's height minus the footer's height, which is this part. Okay, and then trigger position will be the button offset dot top, which means the button's top position, which means the distance from here up until the top of the screen. Okay, because offset is a method, and returns us an object which has top and left property. So we are accessing the top property. So offset function basically gives us the position of the selector, and it gives us the position which is top and left. So we are accessing top property, which means we are finding out the distance from here up until the button. Okay, minus element offset from top. Okay, so whatever the distance we had created, we will minus that from this. Okay. So when we remember earlier, we had a distance from here, from this point up until the top of the screen, and now we have the distance from this point up until top of the screen. So if you subtract uh, this distance minus this, then we'll get this distance. So this is basically the trigger position. So when the trigger position reaches beyond this point, which is reaches in this area, that's when I want to call AJAX function again, so that the next 10 posts are loaded. Okay. So that's what we're doing right here. It's saying that when the scroll top position, which means this is the scroll, when this height, basically this position, scroll top position, is greater than the trigger position, which means if this position, so right now it's here, this distance, okay, right now this distance is greater than this distance, and that's when the trigger position AJAX request will be made, sorry, and that's when the AJAX request will be made. When this distance is greater than from here up until here, that's when the next 10 posts will be loaded. That's when the AJAX will be called again. Okay, and that makes sense because see, right now this distance is not greater than the distance from top up until that button, so that's why the next 10 posts are not being loaded. You can see that nothing is happening here, but the moment if you scroll down and this entire distance become greater than the button, the next 10 posts are loaded. Okay, so I hope you understood that. Okay, so basically the scroll distance is greater than the button distance, and that's when the another AJAX request is made, and this will keep on happening every time the user scrolls and the distance of the button changes. Okay, cool. So I think that's pretty much it. There's nothing else in this that I need to explain. I hope you've understood everything clearly. If you have any questions, you can always come and ask. Okay, cool. All right, thank you very much for watching, guys. This was basically a very easy project to make infinite scroll. Okay, thank you.